Hey guys, Louise here with Red Pony Dog Training. Today's Reactive Dogs Chat episode is going to be all about the 2 secrets you need to be aware of in order to resolve your dog's reactivity or aggression. That's right, I said resolve your dog's reactivity and aggression. Now, notice I didn't say fix, because these dogs, they're not broken. They don't need to be fixed, they just need help. So today's episode, we're going to dive deep into those 2 key secrets. Are you ready? Let's get started. So the first secret you need to be aware of in order to help your dog is distance. Distance is one of the key factors in how your dog is going to succeed, both just in the world around their triggers and in a training session. Now, let me give you an example. When you're walking your dog, let's say they're reactive to other dogs. If you try to walk shoulder to shoulder by another dog, well, I'll let you use your imagination. I'm sure you can see that that would be difficult. And that's something we can all relate to. I've said that a lot in this series. You guys have probably been like, you're right. Reactivity is a lot like fear with people. And so if we're close to something that makes us uncomfortable, we're more uncomfortable than if that thing is further away. So if you want to help your dog's reactivity or aggression, distance needs to be considered. Let's say you wanted to do some training with your dog, whatever that looks like, and your dog is 50 yards away from their trigger. They're probably going to do great. Probably going to do really well. So what happens over time is you get closer and closer and closer and closer. But you have to go at the dog's pace, right? We've talked about that before as well. This isn't something that you can dictate. It's up to your dog. So you want to slowly decrease the distance over time as your dog starts to feel better. Now, outside, one of the things you want to do the first time your dog sees a trigger is to seek distance, because your dog is going to be overwhelmed and maybe even startled if that trigger comes at them and they're close together. There's not a lot of distance or space there. So keeping that in mind, you want to be working on an emergency U-turn or something that you can use to immediately bail on any situation that's too difficult for your dog. Now, similarly, we've talked about management and prevention a lot in this series, but when you're considering where to take your dog with reactivity or aggression, you need to consider if you have enough distance for your dog to be successful. And why is that, people? Because if your dog rehearses the behavior, it will be much more difficult to resolve in the long run. Non-rehearsal has to be a part of your training plan. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to episode 1. Okay, so when you're considering where to take your dog out for exercise or for training, you need to consider the environment that you find yourself in. One of my favorite places to go with my clients in the early days is just big, wide open areas like soccer fields, for example, or a parking lot if it's safe to do so. The reason being is you generally have boatloads of space, all of the space and distance that you need for your dog to be successful. And you can see dogs and other triggers coming from far away. Now, okay, I'm going to give you a couple more tips and tricks about this too, and not just the 2 secrets, but I want you to always be considering, what's my escape? What are you going to do when it hits the fan and all of a sudden you're losing that distance that your dog needs to be successful? So a specific example could be, let's say you go to a soccer field and you're just training some foundations with your reactive dog. They're doing great, they're paying attention, all good things are happening. But all of a sudden, you didn't realize there's a soccer game today. That's literally happened to me before. There's cars pulling in, young boys just leaping out of vehicles, soccer balls going everywhere, and my dogs are sensitive to children and a lot of activity. So you can imagine I'm always thinking about, what's my escape plan? I need to protect my exit route so that when things get too exciting or when the distance is no longer available to me and my dog for them to be successful, I can quickly escape. So I always keep an eye out between me and my vehicle. So when I'm out training my dog again in a field situation, I can quickly return to my car. And that means I can protect the integrity and the quality of my training session, and I can protect my dog from feeling like they have to rehearse that reactive behavior in order to stay safe. Because you know what? I'm going to keep them safe. They don't have to do it. That's part of the process. So another thing to consider is, let's say you want to take your dog on a walk around the neighborhood. Are you going to be able to get the distance that your dog needs to be successful? The answer is probably no, but it really does depend on the dog. Some dogs just need to cross the street from their trigger in order to feel comfortable and stay successful. Other dogs may need you to run behind the neighbor's house. And if you're not willing to do that, and that's okay, don't walk your dog in the neighborhood. Again, go back to management and prevention because we need to create a plan that prevents your dog from feeling like they have to defend themselves all the time. Otherwise, this isn't not going to change for them. So neighborhood walks really depend on your dog. And then let's say you want to take your dog on a trail. Do you guys know what a single track trail is? They're kind of my favorite. Just like a winding bike path. They're very wild. I love it. I love nature. I love being in the woods. But let's imagine you're on a very narrow path with your dog, and there's thick woods over here and there's thick woods over there. Are you going to be able to get the distance you need for your dog to be successful without bushwhacking? The answer is no. So you need to consider the trails that you're going on. Are they nice and wide? Are you going to be able to get the distance that you need and that your dog needs? So let me tell you a couple of stories and examples. One time I was walking my dog Monzo at a state park, and I thought we were going to have a good amount of distance, but one of the dogs we came across was off leash. And off leash dogs don't give you any distance, regardless of how quickly or how much you try to divert them, unless they have a good recall, which is a topic for another day, right? So we're walking and a dog comes and I quickly move off trail. The dog keeps coming. So I realized I need to go into the woods. So I'm bushwhacking through the woods with Monzo. We're moving at a good click, just trying to get away from this other dog. And I got a twig to the eye. It was rough. It was a rough day. Got a nice big scratch across my eye. My dog was great, but I was not. And so I didn't go back there. And I didn't say that was a failure, right? He was fine. Everything was fine except for my eyeball. But you need to consider, are you willing to do that? Or are you going to stay on the side of the trail and let your dog react? And I don't want that. That's not ideal. It's going to happen and that's okay. But we really need to be considering that distance and that safety for our dogs. Now, another story real quick. One of my clients was trying to do this. She was trying to find safe and controlled spaces to take her dog to train so they could work on his reactivity. And she thought she was going to have plenty of distance. The trail was nice and wide. And then it was like a downward slope into some open woods. So it would be perfect. If she had to move off trail, she'd have the space to get the distance that she needed. She did not plan, however, for all the poison ivy on the side of the trail. And she was really allergic. So she could not get the distance she needed for her dog to be successful. And guess what? He freaked out. He had a big reaction, and that was it. And so, again, it's not a big failure. It's not the end of the world. She's just not going to go back there to train, maybe until the winter time when the poison ivy is not there. So let's quickly recap about distance. Your dog needs to be as far away as they need to be successful in order to feel safe so you can effectively train them. So when you're going out, I want you to be thinking about how far do I need to be and where do I go in order to get that distance? Actually, let me backtrack again. We didn't even talk about dogs that are reactive in the house. Give me a like or drop a comment below if your dog's reactive at home. It's really helpful for me to know. But I live in a 700 square foot apartment. I'm never going to get the distance that my dogs need. So we don't train inside, we train outside. And if your dog is reactive or aggressive at home, you need to consider that. Don't let your dog meet people at the front door. Put your dog all the way on the other side of the house, train a safe space. Again, management and prevention. Make sure you get my free beginner's guide. I'll link that info below if you don't know what I'm talking about. We need that distance. Take that pressure off the dog and then let them come out and approach as far away from your guest as they can. Let them think about it before they rush up and say hello and maybe make a choice or a decision that they can't take back. So distance is your number one secret. Now, the second secret you need to consider in order to fully resolve your dog's reactivity and aggression, are you ready? It's intensity. And the intensity as it relates to the trigger. So let's talk about a couple examples of what intensity might be. Let's say your dog is reactive to cars. Well, a big bus is a higher intensity than a quiet Prius. A bunch of cars is higher intensity than one car. A dump truck, a plow truck. You see where I'm going. The higher intensity the trigger is, the more reactive your dog is likely to be. Let's say you're out training and you see one border collie 20 yards away, totally focused on their parents, not concerned about you at all. That's pretty low intensity. But now let's imagine that border collie is fetching, running back and forth with a tennis ball, higher intensity. So, a couple of examples. My dog Monzo is fine with other dogs if they're low intensity. He just doesn't want them to bother them. Dogs that stare, higher intensity. Dogs that have high energy, higher intensity. More dogs, more intensity. So, when we're considering a training session for your dog, reactive or aggressive, really analyze the intensity and start as low as possible. Okay. So we were talking about that in the last episode about how to get that gradual exposure over time. We need to start at a low intensity as often as we can, and then slowly build up over time as our dogs start to feel better. So a low intensity for a person would be a quiet adult who's ignoring the dog. The next step could be two quiet adults ignoring the dog, or it could be one quiet adult who starts to talk and move their body a little bit. The intensity starts to come up. That doesn't mean they're ready for a bunch of kids. That doesn't mean they're ready for a party either, or to go to a party. So intensity directly affects how your dog is going to feel and how they're going to behave. And when we're trying to help them feel better over time, we really need to analyze that and keep the intensity low to moderate as we start to implement those training techniques. So when you go out, let's say you're walking on a trail. If you see something that's high intensity, you need to be prepared, guess what? To get distance. Okay. So distance and intensity really do come hand in hand. So as they kind of interact with each other, they dictate how far and what your dog is going to need for a successful situation. So let's use that border collie example again. Let's say you're walking on a nice wide trail and you see a border collie on a leash, totally attentive to its parents. Well, the distance may be low because it's just on the other side of the trail from you, but so is the intensity. So you may, depending on your dog, be able to walk by and your dog may feel safe and be able to handle that situation. But if that dog is much closer, say shoulder to shoulder, that still might be too much. So it is, it's an ebb and flow. It's a give and take. It's something we really have to consider when we're training our reactive and sensitive dogs in order to set them up for success. Okay, so there's something else we need to talk about, and that is your dog's threshold. Now, I've talked about this before, but I'm talking about it again because it is so very important. Every single one of you watching this video wants their dog to feel and behave better. I mean, like when it comes right down to it, it's not really convenient to live with a reactive dog, is it? Our lives change in order to help them. And I would love it if every one of you would feel comfortable and confident to do things with their dogs that you can't do now. And I would love that for your dog as well. So we all can agree. We want this behavior to change. We want them to feel more comfortable, confident, and relaxed in the world that they find themselves in. The reality is that if your dog continues to practice this behavior, it's not going to get better. And so, threshold, if your dog is over their threshold, they're reacting. They're staring, they're barking, they're growling, they're lunging, all of those things. And so, when they're under threshold, they're not doing those things. So you can kind of think of it as like a line of safety. When your dog goes over threshold, they're no longer feeling safe. And when they're under threshold, they're still feeling safe, but maybe considering the fact that maybe there's a threat out there as they start to toe that line. And so dogs are always learning, even if you're not trying to teach them something. And so dogs over threshold will still learn. They're just learning to be reactive, and dogs that are under threshold are more open to learning the things that you're trying to teach them, to pay attention, to walk nice on a leash, not to worry about what other people, dogs, cars, kids, joggers, bicyclists have to do with them, because it's nothing. So we want to keep our dogs under threshold whenever possible, because that's when we have the best chance at really changing your dog's behavior over time. And the other things to consider about your dog's threshold and level of stress in general is that when they're over threshold, they're in fight or flight. They're not really capable of listening to you, taking food, or making good decisions. Okay. And when they're under threshold, they're susceptible to hearing you, to taking food, and to listening to you. So we really want to keep them under threshold whenever possible. And now you guys have the two secrets in order to do that: distance from triggers and the intensity of the trigger. So set up those training scenarios. Consider the intensity of the things that you find in your dog's world. Consider how to get more distance from your dog's triggers in order to keep them under threshold, feeling good, and being successful. I hope you guys found today's episode interesting. I would love it if you'd hit that like button down below, give me a little positive reinforcement for doing these videos for you. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Reactive Dog Chats. I really love talking about reactive dogs because I have them too, and it makes me happy to be able to help you understand them just a little bit better. Tell your dog I said hello, give them a treat from me, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.